Welcome to Pick Up and Deliver, the podcast where I pick up my audio recorder as I step off the train and deliver an episode to you while I walk home. I'm Brendan Riley. Well, good afternoon, listeners. It is a lovely day here in suburban Chicago. Temperature in the mid-30s, which means that the snow is melting nicely. The sidewalks are almost ice-free, and it's a very pleasant day to be walking home. If my hands get a little chilly, I'll slip on some mittens. In fact, I am going to slip on some mittens so they stay nice and warm, but overall the temperature is just quite a treat. Much warmer than one would expect for January. This feels like mid-February weather. Hopefully things won't get too warm too fast, unless they're going to stay warm because we don't want trees to get tricked. But overall, yeah, here we are. As I have been doing the last several episodes, it is the continuation of my top 50. I am revealing one by one the games that I decided are in my top 50 in this most recent revision of it. The first one being the first assembly of the list was in 2015, so this is my fourth iteration of the list. I do it about every 2 years. So here we go. Last time we got up to episode number 20, or game number 23, so now we're on game number 22. We're across the halfway point, and we're screeching into the last bit. Now, I am going to be doing not quite as many games per episode, so I get a little bit more time to talk about each one as I go. But generally, the plan is still going to be the same. I'm going to give you a brief reminder of what the game's about, then talk about the thing that I like best about the game. So to start off, Wingspan. The first appearance on my list was in 2019. It was the first time it was eligible. Before that, it didn't exist. And it was number 16 on my list at that point. It has dropped a few spaces to number 22 today. That's 22 Wingspan from Elizabeth Hargrave and Stonemeyer Games. I'm assuming you've played Wingspan or heard of it. It's been all the buzz for the last few years, but just in case you haven't, this is a game in which you have a collection of natural... You're some sort of nature preserve collector person, and you are collecting birds that will go onto your tableau in one of 3 different habitats, and then those birds become an engine. It is an engine builder, and each bird gives you a slightly different benefit. Whenever you run one of the 3 habitats to get either food or eggs or draw more cards, the birds that are in that habitat will also activate. So as the game goes along, careful placement of interesting birds will result in a sort of cascading of different actions and activities as the game goes along. The art in the game is beautiful. The expansions have been really interesting. They've added enough flavor to keep the game playable and interesting even as it gets bigger. But it also means the base game stays fresh, because if we play several games with the expansions and then we just want to go try the base game, we haven't worn it out. This is a game I've upgraded a bit. We have upgraded game tokens that are 3D printed little wheats and cherries and so on. And then we also have updated player pieces. Generally in the game, you have these little cubes that come with the game, and we have actually 2 different sets of player pieces. You can, if you play my copy of Wingspan, you can either have tiny little birdhouses or tiny little birds to be your playing pieces. My favorite thing about Wingspan, something I think is very clever, is the way that as your ability to do stuff expands through careful creation of this engine building system, the number of things you get to do on a turn reduces. Most games, as the game goes along, you get more things. A lot of worker placement games particularly, you get more opportunities as the game goes along. You get more pieces. And as a result, you get the turns don't get longer, but the rounds get longer. There's a wider array of things you can do. Because of the engine building aspect of Wingspan, as the game goes along, each turn you take has more stuff you're doing. In the first round, you might take a turn where you take a die, you get food, and that's your whole turn. In the 4th round, just taking the food die, you're probably getting 2 or 3 food dice. And then every bird that you put in the food row gets activated, which means you might get to draw a card, you might roll some dice, you might give some food to somebody else, or everybody takes some food, or there's innumerable things that could happen as you take your turns, which means the turns get longer. So one of the ways they balance for that, and I think is very clever, is that each round, at the end of the round, there's a round scoring goal. And whatever you achieve on that scoring goal, you mark it by taking one of your player pieces that lets you take an action, and putting it on the scoring pad. Now you have one less player piece to use, which means you have fewer actions. So as your actions get longer and more complicated, you do fewer of them, which means the game keeps up a consistent pace. I really like everything about that. I like exactly what I described in terms of keeping up a consistent pace. I like the idea that as your actions get more elaborate, you have fewer of them to use. And I really, really like the elegance of placing one of your action pieces on the scoring pad, because you need to mark the scoring pad. So instead of giving you different tokens and then saying you lose one of your tokens, they tied it together. They said you mark your score with one of those tokens, and now you also have one less one to use for an action. It's genius. It's really a brilliant piece of the game. And it's just one of the many things I like about Wingspan, but it is the thing I'm going to mention today as the thing I like to call out for my top 50. So that is number 22 on my top 50, Wingspan, with art by 3 different people, one of whom is Beth Sobel, designed by Elizabeth Hargrave, published by Stonemeyer Games. All right, my number 21 game. Oh, and Wingspan was on my list in position 16 before. Now it's at 22. All right, my number 21 game has been on my list this entire time, yet I have never played it since I started making this list. In fact, it was probably a decade before I made this list since the last time I played it, or even longer. And that is Vampire: The Eternal Struggle. Vampire: The Eternal Struggle is a card game themed around Vampire the Masquerade, the original White Wolf property in which vampires have a secret council that runs the world. And you play as a Methuselah, a very, very old vampire with tons of power, who is struggling for power against the other Methuselahs. You do so by siring minions who will work for you and using those minions to accomplish your goals. Now, this is a game that I played a ton when I was in grad school. My friends and I bought lots of the cards, and I still have a couple thousand cards in my basement divided up into decks, just waiting for the time when I decide I want to play it again. So this game, this position, number 21, is entirely nostalgic or entirely about memory. There are a lot of really cool things that happen in Vampire: The Eternal Struggle. There's lots of really neat card combos, lots of really interesting play interactions. It's a fantastic, fascinating game with a ton of depth and really interesting and unique mechanisms that I still haven't seen much. My favorite of these is the blood system. So you have a store of blood at the beginning of the game called your pool. And this is the blood that represents your own individual life and power. The game ends for you when your pool has been exhausted. Not unlike your magic score, your magic die in Magic the Gathering, your individual hit points. The difference is, in Vampire, many of the things that you have to do, not all, but many of the things you have to do involve spending some of the blood out of your pool. When you want to sire a vampire, you take blood out of your pool and put it on that vampire. Now, that vampire has blood and it can act until its blood is exhausted, and it gained that blood from you, which means that you're constantly having to weigh the danger you're facing from other vampires with the desire to do things and how much of your own power you're willing to spend, thus making yourself weaker in order to be able to take actions which you would use to attack the other players. It's a genius idea and really a compelling way to govern what happens in the game. And it's just the tops. So I haven't played it in 15 years easily, but it's still a top 50 game for me. Always will be, I suspect. That's Vampire: The Eternal Struggle. Designed by Richard Garfield, published by White Wolf back in the day. Actually, probably published by Wizards of the Coast, now that I think about it. All right, just as a record, it was number 17 in 2015, number 24 in 2017, number 19 in 2019, and number 21 in 2022. That's Vampire: The Eternal Struggle. Next up on my list is another brand new one to the list. This is Obsession, designed by Dan Hadigan at Kayenta Games. So, Obsession is, as I've talked about many times on this podcast, a sort of board game version of the dance of prominence and aristocracy in the late 1700s. So it's sort of like Jane Austen, Pride and Prejudice game as a board game. You could also kind of see it as Downton Abbey, the board game, but the game takes place about 100 years before Downton Abbey, so it's more Pride and Prejudice. Nonetheless, the theme is top-notch, and it is the thing that drives it to get lots of plays in our house. My wife really likes it, and she does very well at it. The thing I like most about the game is the management of the staff. So you have a variety of staff. At the beginning of the game, you begin with one butler, one head housekeeper, one lady's maid, one valet, and one footman. If you're playing with the expansion, you also get to pick one extra worker who could be either a cook, a hall boy, or a useful man. And then you are going to use those figures to host events or to staff events. So you have a small selection of cards that represent your family and the close friends they have in the area. And then you host different events using the different parts of your house. And that lets you get more prestige, more money, more friends. And then you can use that money to build additional things onto your house, which let you get more prestige, friends, and money, all of which leads toward getting the most prestige and winning the game. There's a really nice variance in the building draw deck and in the cards you're drawing, but I really like the way that you have to manage your staff. You have a certain number of staff, you can hire more, and every time you use a staff member, they go into the exhausted staff area, and then on your next turn, they are resting and you can't use them. I love this mechanism. In fact, it was part of my first design, which is still kind of moldering in unfinished territory. That is Something Wakes in the Forest. Had as its key element the idea that you have workers, and as you play them, they then are exhausted, or I called them despoiled, and they had to rest for a turn before you could use them again. But everything about Obsession is great, except the graphic design feels a little, could use a little bit more work to my mind, or I think it looks a little less than polished. But it's very functional and the game is super fun. So I'm very happy to have and to continue playing Obsession, my number 20 game of all time. All right, next up, we've got another new one to my list, number 19, brand new to the list this year. This is Res Arcana. Res Arcana is a tableau building, engine building game from Tom Lehman, the designer of Race for the Galaxy. And in it, you are arranging a series of artifacts and creatures to set yourself up to accumulate a variety of resources, which will allow you to buy other artifacts and creatures, and eventually set you up to gain a monument or a place of power, or often both. And the place of power becomes the thing that you use to finish the game. The place of power is a space that gives you points, usually by converting resources to points in some way. And the game goes until at the end of any particular round, you play in a round. All your cards are reset, and then you can take turns taking one action per turn until everyone has passed. Once everyone has passed, then you check and see if anybody has won by getting 10 points or more. If anyone has 10 points or more, then the game is over, and whoever has the most points wins. So sometimes it is the person who has 10 points, but often several people will break the 10-point barrier on the same round, and then it's somebody who has more than 10 points. Part of what's really interesting about it is at the beginning of the game, you get dealt 8 cards, and you draft those cards. You take a card, pass your hand, take a card, pass your hand, until you've drafted 8 cards, and those are the 8 cards you'll have for the game. You never get more cards. On any given turn, you're going to draw 1 card, or any given round, you're going to draw 1 card. So you start with 3 in hand, and getting the rest is pretty slow unless you take active energy, use active resources to recruit more cards. But that comes at a cost. It comes at an opportunity cost and a tempo cost. So because of those things, Res Arcana is really sharp. It's very tight, really demands thoughtful play, and makes for a very tight, interesting package in a short playtime. I like the art a lot, but honestly, the thing that I'm going to say that this game does for me that other games don't is that very tight economy. You have 8 cards, that's all you get, and you have to make it work. I love that. It really makes for an interesting and exciting game, and every time I play it, it's a treat. So that's Res Arcana from Tom Lehman, my number 19 game. My number 18 is a game that was on my list in 2019 in the 14th spot, and this year it's number 18. This is London, 2nd edition from Martin Wallace. Now, London is a game that came out a long time ago and had a big board, And then when Osprey Games published the second edition, they got rid of the board and used location cards instead, which do a lot of the work of the board but change the dynamics slightly. Now here's what I love about London. Everything you do in London increases what you can do, increases your stuff, but it also increases poverty, which is represented by these cubes. And a huge part of the game is you have to constantly be working to minimize or reduce the amount of poverty that you take. But every time you run your engine, you're going to take more poverty. So you're constantly trying to figure out, how do I get rid of it? How do I get rid of it? Because at the end of the game, everybody scores up their points. And then you all count up your poverty. And whoever has the least amount of poverty gets to discard all of theirs. And then everybody else gets penalties based on how much they had left. So it is a genius mechanism with a brutal result if you haven't been paying attention. Because for the first couple cubes, poverty doesn't do much to your score. But if you get to the point where you have 5, 6, 7 poverty, your score is taking a huge hit. And I've had games where I lose 20 or 30 points because of poverty cubes, because I just wasn't paying attention to the person who had the fewest. It is a remarkable mechanism and one that makes for really interesting play. I will offer as a honorable mention, there's a secondary thing that you have to do that I think is genius, where every time you want to play a card, you have to discard a card of the same color. This creates a really interesting dynamic in which you're trying to figure out, you're constantly trying to draw new cards that you don't want so you can play cards you do want. And every time you discard a card, it goes into the market where other players can get that card that you discarded. So even if you're discarding a card you don't want, sometimes you end up handing your opponent exactly the thing they needed. It's genius. And something I really enjoy. It's something I am happy to put on my top 50 list in the number 18 spot. And that's London, 2nd edition. And finally, the last game I want to offer is one I haven't played in a while. And I am jonesing to play it. It's been on my top of the stack list for a while now because I wanted my wife to play it. I bought the campaign expansion, or I got the campaign expansion for Christmas. This is the Rainer Stockhausen game, Orleans. Orleans was not on my list in 2015, but in 2017 it was 15th place. In 2019 it's 31st place. In 2022 it's back to 17th place. Now this may suffer a little bit from the pie-eyed memory rating, where I remember how good it is, but I haven't played it in a long time, so maybe it's not as good as I remember, but I'm pretty sure it is. It's so good. This is a game, the element I like in this game is the dance of the tokens you're going to buy. Every round, you're putting out tokens. You're trying to figure out how to use your different citizens in the best way. And when you use your citizens, you often then can buy a new citizen. And when you buy a new citizen, you go up on these tracks, which give you various kinds of bonuses. But more importantly, they put that citizen into your bag, and then you have the chance of using them. Of course, the game is kind of cruel in certain ways, in that you always are drawing from your bag, and you might never draw the citizen that you wanted. Or sometimes there's a plague and you lose the citizen you just bought. That can be really harsh. So there's an element of cruel randomness in the game that I think makes for a spicy experience. But Orleans is a monstrously rewarding, a dramatically rewarding game. Monstrously sounds bad. A dramatically rewarding game with really interesting interactions between the players, really interesting competition on the map for selling things, and a delightful table presence built on medieval art. It's a game I love to play, and I'm looking forward to playing it some this year. That's Orleans, my number 17 from Rainer Stockhausen, and I believe DLP Games is the publisher. It was Tasty Minstrel was the U.S. distributor, but they have unfortunately gone out of business. I believe Capstone picked it up for the next round. So, what do you think of my most recent games? The ones that I just added to the list. Head over to Board Game Geek Guild 3269 and share your thoughts. I would love to hear them so that I can know what you have on your top 50 and how my top 50 compares. If you want to reach out to me directly, you can email me, brendan@rattleBoxGames.com, or you can send me a direct message on Board Game Geek. My username is, I suspect you know it, Wombat929. I hope to hear from you soon, and I hope to see you over in the Board Game Geek Guild sharing about your top 50. Thanks for joining me on my walk today. It's been quite pleasant, and I hope that you have a pleasant one as well next time you take a walk. In other words, I hope that your next walk is as pleasant as mine was. All right, bye-bye.
Brought to you by Rattlebox Games.